David Hume was a key figure during the time of enlightenment. As many of these great thinkers were, he was very intelligent and well read and was considered to be well versed in many areas. He entered the University of Edinburgh at 12. He wrote influential works such as the Treatise of Human Nature, Inquiry of Concerning Human Understanding, and Dialogue Concerning Natural Religion. Hume aspires to do for human nature what Isaac Newton did for non-human nature. He wanted to create a science of human understanding, to provide principles of explanation both simple and comprehensive. Hume's motivation for providing a science of human understanding. He wanted to debunk popular superstitions. Whatever cannot be demonstrated on the basis of experience and reason, he wanted to avoid. When we could not understand why things occurred in the natural world a certain way, for centuries before the era of enlightenment, what they really went to was the area of superstition. He wanted to try to avoid that. What Hume's motivation was, he wanted to remove reliance on superstition as a explanation for things that occurred in the world. So, Hume on Descartes. You can read this slide at your leisure. But basically, what it comes down to, the driving force behind Hume was this: in understanding the mind, we cannot go beyond experience. And see, by relying on superstitions, as many generations before Hume did, they went beyond what their actual real experiences were. So he's just trying to reemphasize in understanding the mind, we cannot go beyond our experience. So Hume thinks we must form principles of human nature from the data. The data that Hume speaks of are what he calls perceptions. All the contents of our minds when we are awake and alert, which for Hume is all our ideas, all the ideas of the sciences, all the arbitrary and superstitious ideas. Note that Hume holds the representational theory of mind that we see in Berkeley and others. Hume aims to draw a line between legitimate and illegitimate ideas. So Hume aims to uncover the origins of our ideas. Let's take a minute to discuss this representational theory of mind, or representationalism. Things in the world are accessed only indirectly. These ideas are understood to include all of the contents of the mind, including perceptions, images, memories, and so on. Ideas and the things they represent are separate from each other. These represented things are many times external to the mind. It is possible for these ideas to constitute either accurate or false representations. Basically, what it comes down to is this: when we see something and we have that image in our mind, we only have a representation of that thing that really exists in the real world. So, the origin of ideas, the source of ideas. For Hume, ideas are merely faint images or copies of much more vivid experiences, perceptions of the senses and emotional states. This difference in liveliness is the real difference between the weaker state of mind we call ideas and the other perceptions of the mind which Hume proposes to call impressions. So in this slide we see impressions and ideas. So impressions, feelings or sentiments, there's no assumptions of the external world. This is the information that we're getting directly from the world out there. Ideas. Ideas, however, are slightly different. These ideas are more feeble perceptions, weaker perceptions of what really did exist based on our impressions. So look at it this way. In Hume's theory of ideas, perceptions can be divided into impressions, and ideas. Impressions enter the mind with the most force and violence, sensations, passions, and emotions. Ideas, the faint images of impressions and thinking and reasoning. This example may help to clarify a little bit. If you slap a table with your hand, the sound you hear is an impression, as if it's impressing something onto you. It has force, sometimes violence. It impresses on you. And your recollection of that sound is an idea. So, for Hume, it seems all the perceptions of the mind are double and appear both as impressions and ideas. But Hume notices that this isn't correct, for you can have an idea that doesn't correspond to any impression. But Hume notes that such cases are only complex ideas, or you sort of manufacture it from simpler ideas. So for every simple perception, our perceptions are always double. Every simple idea corresponds to a simple impression that resembles it. So, simple ideas depend on simple impressions. Hume argues that every simple idea has some simple impression as a causal antecedent. That impression cause the simple idea. To give a child an idea of a scarlet or orange, of sweet or bitter, I present the objects, or in other words, convey to him these impressions. We cannot form to ourselves a just idea of the taste of a pineapple without having actually tasted it. So, the origin of all of our ideas are impressions. Without an impression, there is no idea. So, we can trace ideas to impressions. So, Hume's rule is this: if there is no impression, then there is no idea. But for Hume, it infers that every meaningful term is associated with an idea. Every meaningful term is associated with an idea. So if you have a term that is not associated with an idea, or there's no impression related to it, then that term really doesn't have much meaning behind it. So determining if a term is meaningless, trace the idea associated with the term back to an impression. Trace the idea associated with the term back to an impression. If you can do so, then you have something that is meaningful. If not, you have failed. You have something that really does not have any meaningfulness associated with it. The association of ideas. The principles that bind impressions and ideas together to produce the complex mental lives of humans. The world of ideas is governed by the gentle force of association. Association is a kind of attraction. This gentle force operates without our consent, will or even consciousness of it. For Hume, the mind just works this way. We associate things together. He isn't going to try to explain why, for to do so would frame a hypothesis, but he's just saying this is the way it works for us. He notes first that we should be able to test for such principles by observing our own trains of thought. It is evident that there is a principle of connection between the different thoughts or ideas of the mind, and that their appearance to memory or imagination, they introduce each other with a certain degree of method and regularity. Basically, think of it this way: you see something and then it reminds you of something else. Association. One idea causes a cascade of other ideas. Relationship and association. So, principles of the association of ideas. Hume thinks there are three principles of association. To me, there appear to be only three principles of connection among ideas: resemblance, A picture naturally leads our thoughts to the original. It reminds you of something, it resembles it. Contiguity in time or place. The mention of one apartment in a building naturally introduces an inquiry or discourse concerning the others. And cause and effect. And if we think of a wound, we can scarcely forbear reflecting on the pain which follows it. So we have the wound, pain is going to be it. Cause and effect. So the three principles of association: resemblance, contiguity in time or place, and cause and effect. So, relations of ideas. All objects of human inquiry are either relations of ideas or matters of fact. Relations of ideas. The science of geometry, algebra, and arithmetic. 3 times 5. Well, 3 times 5 is discoverable by the mere operations of thought without dependence on anything existent in the universe. Consider the contrary of a relation of idea. Consider 2 added to 3 that is not 5. This is false because of the way the ideas are related to each other. Its denial is contradictory. We need to make no appeals to experience to know it is false. Instead, we can know it is false by the mere operation of thought. Matters of fact. The contrary of a matter of fact is still possible. It never implies a contradiction. It can be conceived by the mind with the same facility and distinctness as the matter of fact itself, as if ever so conformable to reality. False because of the way the world actually is or turns out to be. To determine its truth or falsity, we must consult the external world and experience. That the sun will not rise tomorrow is no less intelligible and implies no more contradiction than the sun will rise tomorrow. It is something that is a matter of fact. So there are two subjects of inquiry: relation of ideas, knowledge obtained by mere investigation of our concepts a priori necessary, denial is contradictory, and matters of fact. Knowledge obtained by empirical investigation a posteriori, contingent, and denial is consistent. So, direct knowledge, perception, memory, indirect knowledge, all involves knowledge of cause and effect. Too much alcohol causes hangovers. My car is in my driveway. More than half of Arkansas voters intend to vote for McCain. We will eventually die. So, knowledge of matters of fact: direct knowledge, perception, memory, indirect knowledge, all involves knowledge of cause and effect. Too much alcohol causes hangovers. My car is in my driveway. More than half of the Arkansas voters intend to vote for candidate X. We will all eventually die. So we have direct knowledge, but all this stuff that we named here is indirect knowledge. We assume it because of cause and effect. Now, how do we know cause and effect? All indirect a posteriori knowledge relies on it. Where does it come from? Not from reason. Causal connection not logically necessary. Unfamiliar causal relations not known by ideas alone. Water suffocates. Two sheets of marble can't be pulled apart. Nothing inconceivable about billiard balls simply stopping after contact. Can't deduce the effects from ultimate cause because we don't know ultimate cause. So basically, what this is getting to is this notion: we believe in cause and effect, but it's not necessarily irrational to do so. Belief in causation comes from experience. But how? We only experience correlations. A is constantly conjoined with B. We never experience causal connection between them. This leads us to the problem of induction, which was mentioned in the very first chapter of this course. Any argument whose conclusion goes beyond direct experience would have the following form. A has always been followed by B. Things we have not observed will resemble things we have. Therefore, the next A will be followed by B. That's induction. The problem, any argument whose conclusion goes beyond direct experience would have the following form. A has always been followed by B. Things we will not observe will resemble things that we have. Therefore, the next A will be followed by B. All causal experimental reasoning, all indirect knowledge of matters of fact relies on the uniformity principle. Things we have not observed will resemble things we have. Again, things we have not observed will resemble things we have. But how can we know the uniformity principle? Relation of ideas a priori. The uniformity principle can't be a priori. It's contingent. The denial is logically consistent. Matter of fact, a priori. Direct, UP can't be direct about things we haven't experienced yet. Indirect, UP can't be indirect. All indirect matters of fact rely on the uniformity principle. So argument would be circular. So we can't have any reason to believe the uniformity principle. But all inductions is based on the uniformity principle. So there's no rational justification for inductive reasoning. How or why do we form inductive beliefs? Habit, custom, conditioning. Repeated exposure to A being followed by B makes us expect B upon presentation of the next A. Not by any reasoning on our part, by a Pavlovian tendency of the mind to treat similar things as the same. So, Hume on empiricism. Nothing is in the intellect that was not first in the senses. The mind at birth is a blank slate, a tabula rasa. Hume's statement of empiricism. All simple ideas are copies of impressions. Complex ideas may be copied from or constructed out of impressions. Counterfactual dependence. Those who do not undergo the relevant experiences don't acquire the relevant concepts. Analyzability. All legitimate complex concepts can be analyzed into simple concepts. Concept of causation. We never experience causal relations, only constant conjunction in sensation or reflection. We can't have an idea of something we can't experience. Ideas of causation comes from experience of our conditioned expectation, not from experience of causation among external objects. So the concept of cause is subjective. It is about us, not the world around us. So Hume on causation. As cause B's, if and only if, B's always follow A's, and upon observing A, the mind anticipates occurrence of a B. Hume says that relations of ideas can be certain, but not so for matters of fact. With matters of fact, our evidence is never great enough to amount to certainty. This is because All reasonings concerning matter of fact seem to be founded on the relation of cause and effect. By means of that relation alone, we can go beyond the evidence of our memory and senses. So when we reach beyond our perceptions, we do so in virtue of the relation of cause and effect. A present impression is associated with some idea such that the impression is taken to be the effect of the idea. For Hume, we cannot arrive at knowledge of relations of cause and effect independently of experience. Our knowledge of cause and effect relations is not a priori, nor can our reason, unassisted by experience, ever draw any inference concerning real existence in matter of fact. Cause and effects are discoverable not by reason but by experience. Knowledge of relations of cause and effect is dependent on our having some prior experience of the situation. Knowledge of relations of cause and effect is a posteriori, dependent entirely on experience. So causal predictions are made based on the past experience. If we have never had experience in dealing with a particular relation of cause and effect, we cannot make a prediction. An example: one billiard ball strikes another on a billiard table. I've seen one ball strike another many times. Each time the ball that was struck has moved, the struck ball will move this time. But does 3 follow necessarily from 1 and 2? Isn't it possible that this time something different will happen? So Hume asks why we seem to always think that 3 follows from 1 and 2. Don't we assume something like that following the future will, in the relevant respect, be like the past? Again, this premise is the principle of uniformity of nature.